This is a roundtable with major policymakers from the respective level. I welcome Christophe van Oerebeek, the new General Director of Brussels Mobility.
New since 3 years.
Since
almost new.
Almost since 3 years. Philip Boulard, Secretary General of the Flemish Department of Mobility and Public Works. Also, Emanuele van Damme couldn't attend this afternoon, but Koen Millis will replace her, the General Director of Belgium Civil Aviation Authority, and Jan Steinkool, Policy Officer of DG Move of B1, dealing with TEN-T policy. For those who couldn't attend this whole afternoon, I will quickly recap what has been said before. We have discussed the baseline scenario of the STISE. Firstly, we had a welcome of Victor, and Victor was full-heartedly supporting this research. Then we had an introduction of Stephanie. She has talked about the baseline scenario, which shows that the overall expected growth of transport sustainability appears still to be far out of reach. The share of the car is still striking. We have looked into impact of external trends. Those are hardly doing anything to reach the goals. So in addition, we have looked at the 4 policy measures in order to get to that goals more closer. We have discussed 2 of them, but I wouldn't leave out the other ones. But the first one was the aviation shift. The second one was the ZEZ measure, zero emission zone measure, which is for me strikingly doing the job. 3% of the overall goals of the Green Deal could be implemented by that. The mass measure is more or less supporting that, and the regional, the cross-border rail, deserves, in my case, I would say, more regional authorities. Then we have more specifically elaborated on the 2 measures, the shift to high-speed train from aviation and the zero emission zone. With regard to the shift, I might say that we have discussed it also with Infrabel and with TuckRail and with Brussels Airport, and they are supporting, in fact, that measure. Although they see, of course, major challenges to go for that. And with respect to the zero emission zones, we might need credible policies, as is mentioned, and as Leonard says, Willard says, and the rest will follow from there. I would like to have the discussion with the major policymakers about this. So let's start with Christophe. For me, he's still a new one, but already 3 years there. What do you think about these policy measures? You're hearing me? Or you're...
Tout à fait. Et vous m'entendez?
Yeah.
Bonjour, merci pour les exposés jusqu'à présent. Merci pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you to our speakers. Indeed, the Brussels Capital Regions has a great interest in the 4 proposed measures, given the specifically urban character of Brussels. We've particularly focused on mass mobility as a service and implementation of zero emission zones. As you know, these are key actions with regards to the would move the regional mobility plans of Brussels as given go-ahead last year. So we do think that the switching from car to sustainable and shared and collective transport is absolutely key. One of the particularly important aspects of our mobility as a service policy is to define a regulatory framework in consultation with all service provider of mobility in the interest of the public and of the universal accessibility of transportation systems. To reach this regulatory framework, a project has been carried out with the help of the International Transport Forum and presented a number of recommendations for the introduction of this mobility as a service measure as part of the Brussels capitals in the form of OJA injunctions, but the role of public authorities in mobility as a service is very clear when it comes to public authorities. To introduce a MaaS to its full potential, public authorities have to adopt an explicitly pro-competition approach. The region is then positioned as a facilitator of the development of an ecosystem, a MaaS ecosystem in the region. Obviously, putting in place a regulatory framework without infrastructure will not happen overnight. So to facilitate MaaS, switching to public mobility as part of the regional plan, we developed an open data management platform. This will be interoperable and open to all mobility stakeholders operating in the ecosystem, be they public or private. The project in the RFF provides for the construction of 20 mobility hubs, so physical inclusions, which will allow sharing and along with public mobility initiatives. And finally, the development of a public MaaS solution is really about a close partnership with public and private partnerships, as well as understanding solutions can be carried out in this overall framework. So our position is that of a facilitator of a MaaS ecosystem. The second measure proposed, where we are absolutely active, is the zero or the low emission zone. This has been implemented for 4 years. It will be turned into zero emission zone as previously stated by 2035. And obviously the region now is aware of the potential social economic impact on specific groups of the populations to counter the related impact. A number of accompanying measures have been put in place so as to afford mobility budget to those people who are intending to write off and will go ahead and write off their registration plates of their cars. So we are the study is in full swing with regard to look into other incentives, i.e. the rental Brussels markets for second-hand vehicles as one of the measures. It is absolutely key for supporting measures to be taken when it comes to low emission zones and zero emission zones are implemented. Assessment is ongoing at the national level to identify the measures that could be implemented and harmonized. From 2025, diesel cars and will be banned in the Brussels capital regions and in Flanders, but there's still points to be optimized. The rules related to older vehicles are not all the same, and foreign vehicles have to be separately registered as indicated in our database, and separately for every city, Ghent, Anvers, Antwerpen, Brussels, and we want to harmonize the situations across Belgium as metropolitan regions, and we want to harmonize the system so that these systems can be seamless for users. So Belgium is a regional country with regions with strong responsibilities go wider than that with these low emission zones located across the Eurodelta. So you need to bear in mind that this is Brussels environment, not Brussels mobility, that leads the implementation of low emission zones and could be the leader to implement a dialogue-driven policy with a view to harmonize. So mostly these two measures are of interest to us, and the green transition of high-level service trains is a particularly interesting option with major infrastructural impacts as listed, as described. And obviously the rolling stock is absolutely key. And this is to do with the operator. When we look at the overall, I mean, summing up, we're talking 29 billion plus another 9 million for the rolling stock. This was my introduction. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for this reply, Christophe, if I may say so. But may I ask you again, Leo Verhalle, he talked about also that the high-speed train aviation shift could mean a second high-speed train junction within and around Brussels. Are you opposing that, or are you welcoming that?
The train is a national competency in Belgium and not a regional competency. So for what the infrastructure, there are two junctions who are in the program, an east west and a north south. I don't have a specific advice, but as we see that we are busy in Brussels to implement a new metro line, and it will take a huge amount of work, it has to be prepared for a long time before that the works could take place.
Thank you. May I shift to Philip Boulard, Secretary General from the Flemish region. Do you have a response on the proposals made, Philip?
Yes, I do. And especially when looking at the summary table, I was dazzled by the effect of the zero emission zones. It's like a no-brainer that we should apply. But then again, the question is, how will you apply it? Will we let every city choose its own regulations? Will we have no framework? And there, the study also suggests that a framework on a higher level could be useful. And it's something I tend to believe. But when I see the estimated impact of the zero emission zones, then I think we just should do it better today than tomorrow. Another striking figure in the table for me is the estimated impact of the aviation shift measure. Speaking of which, I'm really wondering if the photo material behind you, Luc, is of a flight below 500 or upper 500 kilometers, but that's a detail. Anyway, when I see the limited impact of the aviation shift, then I'm wondering what are we really talking about, and that's why I'm led to the two measures of the zero emission zone and the potential of mass. Mass isn't really effective on the CO2 emissions and in the short range, but in the longer range, also there we can see a figure of 2.59 megaton of that's an enormous effect. So it's things we really have to invest in, and it means that sustainable transport, sustainable mobility, but only sustainable planning, also sustainable planning, are the key competences we should focus on, rather than other measures that do contribute, but on a much lower level. And as to finish, when I see the impact of the cross-border public train transport systems, is not really a very big impact on the sustainability, as the figures show. But it's something we should also do when working on the aviation shift and urban measures. That was my first view on the summary table, which is very clear to me.
I agree with you, Philip. But as discussed also during this afternoon, what we didn't take into account, and that will because the zero emission zones has got a major effect. Yes, of course, if you implement it. But because also lots of people are coming from out of the city and then have to go into the city with zero emission cars. But what we discussed also this afternoon, it is still unsure if we have enough resources to make all those cars zero emission. So that would be that is the major thing. When we discussed that this afternoon with Svebiak, he said, okay, we have got now a problem with Ukraine, but after that war is solved, then we can handle. But I'm still not sure. But I agree with you.
Yeah, but you also have to take in account public transport systems. And I think that public transport systems have a much bigger role to play in city environments. It already plays a big role in Brussels. It should play an even bigger role in Antwerp, also in Ghent and other cities in our country, in our region. And I think that when we talk about zero emission zones, it must not always be about cars. Because even an autonomous vehicle takes the same space on the road than an existing car today. So it's also an urban planning problem. And when we also take in account the urban planning aspect, then we should shift to very good systems of public transport and, as you know, transit-oriented development also. But I know this wasn't part of the study, but I think we should make that link too. And when you make that link with zero emission zones and with mass, then we could have an overall solution that's really effective.
Yes, I see Christophe wants to come in.
The public transportation is very important, but the shared vehicles too. There are perhaps not enough production of cars possible to replace every cars, but the shared vehicles in Brussels, a vehicle is used 3% of the time, not more than that.
Yeah.
And so we could replace 17 vehicles by a shared vehicle. And so we believed also that the inclusion of the shared vehicles in the mass will be an important key for the success of the solution.
Yes, so you say, in fact, the mass measure is included in the zero emission zone measure.
There are two solutions of the 15, who are the 50 solutions proposed in the regional mobility plan, with a global impact plan with more or less important measures. One of the more important measures is the mass and the shared vehicles.
Yes, okay. Philip, do you want to say something about this?
No, I think Christophe is right. When you go to a performant mobility system, you're going to sharing solutions, you're going to a performant public transport system, and why not? Cars are still welcome, but on another level, and with other pricing effects, I think also, because that's something we didn't mention before. Pricing effects on cars are, as I'm concerned as an expert, are also part of a solution. And it's a difference between policy making and policy advising. I'm really a policy advisor to my minister. She's making the policy. But when I advise her, I can say to her, there will always be a role for cars, but the pricing today isn't quite right, I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you for this first. Perhaps I will come back to you later about how we proceed then. But first, I would like to give the word to Koen Millis, who is replacing Emanuele. But he will probably say something about the aviation measure as well. Koen, can I give you the floor?
Yes, well, first of all, I'm convinced that the future of aviation is highly correlated its ability to reduce CO2 emissions. If we aren't capable as a sector to reduce CO2 emissions, we are failing in our role. So in that sense, as a federal ministry, we try to support all initiatives taken to reduce CO2 emissions, and for that reason, an initiative like this one is welcomed by us very much. But we also invest in things like sustainable aviation fuels and the development of it, Fit for 55. These are all things that we try to support in any way we can, because we are quite convinced that CO2 reduction is a necessity also for the aviation sector. If you're talking about a shift, I do agree with the things said by Philip. I've gathered some figures from Eurocontrol. The number of flights less than 500 kilometers, that's approximately 24% of the numbers of flights in Europe, but it represents 3.8% of the CO2 emissions. So if the shift towards trains, from flight to trains, the impact on CO2 is rather limited. But that does not mean that we do not need to pursue this, because I'm convinced that every measure that we take to reduce emission is a step forward. Furthermore, I was very much in favor of the mass ecosystem, and I do think that in that sense, I prefer to talk about trains and aviation instead of trains versus aviation. I do think that an integration between the two modes of transport can deliver a reduction as well. To give an example, dating from the days of Sabena, we still have a very large connection with Africa. And for example, in Paris, there are a lot of people that fly to Africa via Brussels. In this point of time, they take the plane in Paris, fly to Brussels, and then from Brussels, they fly to Africa. I am convinced that this trip from Paris to Brussels can be done by train, but only under one condition, that it's as comfortable as taking the plane. And this is not the case because nowadays high-speed trains aren't connected with the airport. So they come in with their luggage, they come to Brussels airport, and there they need to change trains with all the luggage that they bring with them. They simply won't. If we want to go towards a system where a shift is made between that flight, for example, and trains, we have to invest and we have to make a connection between aviation and trains. And that means an investment as well. So for me, mass is certainly a way forward, but it needs investments as well.
Yes, thank you. You're right. And we also discussed this afternoon an experiment which was done by the Thalys, and with one train a day between Paris just for the and Brussels just for the African travelers. I have, but that wasn't sustainable, so it shifted again. So that is of course okay, but when I was researching also the high-speed the aviation data, then I was still wondering why people are still traveling between Brussels and Amsterdam. They still do, and that is also between Frankfurt and Brussels. So those could be easily replaced by high-speed trains already.
Yes, these are most of the times feeding flights, meaning that people travel to Amsterdam to take a long-haul flight towards, wherever in the world.
There are also origin and destination flights, but okay.
Yeah, there are some, but a large part are people flying afterwards towards other destinations in the world. And for example, I'm convinced that part of it has to do with comfort. If I take a plane in Amsterdam towards New York, for example, I check in Brussels. My luggage is transferred directly. I don't need to carry my luggage from one station to another. If we are able to provide that kind of comfort with the train, I'm convinced that people will choose trains because it goes from their city center to the airport. But the level of comfort that we are offering for the moment is not sufficient for most travelers.
But it does exist, Ekun. It does exist. When traveling to Chile, I can perfectly check in Brussels South in the train, and then have my luggage immediately checked into the plane. So it does exist, I think. And I think we should really take those possibilities to avoid short flights when possible.
Definitely, even and that's even the sector wants to avoid this type of flights because from an economical point of view, they're not necessarily profitable. So even from the sector, there's a demand to change some of these flights by trains. But at the end, nowadays, it's the passenger himself who chooses which type of transport he prefers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this first reflection. I would like to move to Jan Steinkel, because of course Europe is coming in here too. It is a multi-level challenge, I would say. So how does DG Move reflect on these possibilities and developments? Jan, can I give you the word?
Yes, thank you. So I speak as the advisor to the European coordinator of the North Sea Baltic corridor, Katrin Trautmann. So the North Sea Baltic corridor is the 10T corridor, and it starts in Sweden, goes via Finland, across the Baltic states, through Poland, through Germany, and then to Belgium and the Netherlands. And so this is, now we're talking about the western part of the corridor that we're working on European, how we can coordinate this corridor. And so as you said it earlier, or the study showed it, that this is a very rich and very busy area also for transport. So it's a very important part of our corridor. And some of you might know the work that we're doing. And I also think that the study is very timely. It's very, obviously it's an important topic, and the coordinator attaches a lot of importance on this whole question of greening of transport and the switch to alternative fuels. And then in this context, also the integration of energy and transport services. And of course, now politically at the moment, there's a lot of talk about other immediate priorities, like mainly the Russian war against Ukraine. But greening of transport and decarbonization stays our main challenge for many years to come, and we'll have to start very, very quickly with that. And not only because of climate change, but also because we need to reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels. And this is what a large part of transport, motorized transport, still depends on. So it's also a strategic question for our mobility, and mobility is part of our European way of life and of managing our society. So the whole topic is very, very relevant. And earlier in the seminar, you also showed the slide on the Green Deal, and which shows how important this topic is and how big this topic is. Because every now and then, Green Deal comes across a bit like a buzzword, but it really is the key strategy for the Commission at the moment. It drives all our policy areas, and many of them have an impact on transport. It's not only the policy that's made in DG Move, it's also vehicle emissions, particle emissions, CO2 standards for cars, renewable energy directive with targets for renewable energy and transport, but also non-road mobile machinery initiatives, which is applicable to trains. And I hope you know that we have a policy objective of shifting more traffic to rail and also to inland waterways, which is especially important in the area that we're now talking about, where inland waterways is most developed in Europe. And we have all of that set out in a sustainable and smart mobility strategy. And of course, we're also financing research projects. We work on urban vehicle access regulations. So this is the global term for low emission zones. And where we see the need for, of course, we see the need for greater harmonization, because to not exclude drivers from other member states, or in the Belgian case, even from other cities, that we need compatibility between the different systems that we have. It's difficult to tackle from a European level, because in Europe we often have this, there's the principle of subsidiarity, that you need to solve policy problems at the lowest possible level, and there needs to be a clear link to European issues for Europe to get involved. But yeah, I thought it was also very interesting. So I approach the whole topics mainly from the TEN-T perspective and from the corridor perspective, but even for that, a lot was interesting. Also what you said, shifting and rehabilitating cross-border missing links for rails between member states. And I know that here, the border regions between Belgium and the Netherlands and Germany, they work on this already, but this is also something that we try to achieve with our corridor. Even on the corridor, we sometimes take a bit of a higher level. There are a lot of regional routes that are not part of the Trans-European Transport Network, but of course, they're equally important. Yeah, on the, you mentioned soft modes of transport, which of course, for an urban mobility context, makes sense and mustn't be forgotten. And yeah, you also, this question about flights that you mentioned earlier, which from personal experience, I find it's not only a question of transport, of comfort, it's also a question of passenger rights. If I take the train to the airport and I miss the plane because the train was delayed for whatever reason, and then I will need to buy a new ticket, I'm not ready to take that risk. Whereas if it were integrated, then it's fine. Then I only have to stress once when I get to I need to make sure that I get to the airport on time. But if I need to make sure I get to the train station on time, and I then still need to make sure that I'm at the airport on time, I have double stress. Then in that case, I could understand why somebody goes to Brussels airport, checks in, is done. Whether he gets to Frankfurt on time doesn't matter. His journey will be taken care of. I think that's an important. Otherwise, I was very surprised by the figures that you presented. I was thought, who in the world would travel from Brussels to Frankfurt by train if it's not for an onward connection, or even Amsterdam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you for this first reflection. As Stephanie, luckily every noses are now in the same direction, I hope. It is a multi-level, it is of course a multi-level challenge, I would say. Nevertheless, also Stephanie, we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to go on work. And if it is a multi-level challenge, you could say, how could we then now move forward together? Just then only to say, okay, we have got finance, and we got subsidy. How can we move on forward? Or is DG Move willing to do that together with the guys on board here, with the Flemish government and with the Brussels government and with the federal government? How do we do it then? Yes,
of course. I mean, all of these, well, the federal government, and then due to the Belgian makeup, also the regions are involved in the policy making and the legislative process. So we have, whenever the Commission makes a proposal in the European framework, the Commission makes a proposal, and then any legislation coming out of the Commission needs to be adopted by the member states in the Council and the European Parliament. And in those, of course, Belgium is involved, and the regions are very important for the corridor, and we work closely together with all the regions along the corridor.
Oh, of course, but there is also between the lines, you could say Eurodelta is prepared to say, okay, we can become a living lab. You can experiment things over here. Is DG Move willing to do that, or is there still the main subsidiarity principle, and then if you're doing this in Western Europe, then you have to do something else in Romania or in Bulgaria?
No. This is not how European funding works. This is the funding is attributed according to rules and not to political priorities. So it's often competitive funding, and then the money that goes to Romania and Bulgaria for cohesion and regional funds is set anyway. So we are very interested in pilot regions like this that go forward and that can provide best practice for other regions. You know, we are interested in those kind of, like you said, living labs or innovation hubs that can then share good practice with all the other member states.
Okay. Then I turn back to our other stakeholders on board. Philip, do you want to respond on the input from Jan or what has been said?
Well, I might add one thing. As I said before, I'm not really the policy maker, but a policy advisor. And there's still, I think, a road ahead as to policy decisions having to be made to really apply these measures on a higher level. So I think that as experts and as people in this journey today of your conference, we all accept and we all agree on the conclusions, but there's still a long way to go in the political sense, and that's also what Mr. Steinkohl said. They are expecting us to act here, and us as regions, together with the federal government, to act in the direction of by example a framework on zero emission zones that is more or less, yeah, concerted with each other. I think that's an important next step to take, and then we might be an example on a European level, and there might also be a European initiative. That's what we saw with some mobility planning. Also, we might deliver another example on zero emission zones. I think there's a possibility there.
But as you know, as I do, is politicians don't take a decision when there's not support in society and where there's not supported by the Department of Mobility and Public Works and etc. etc. So
yeah, of course, there will be a support from departments within the Flemish government. Also, the environmental department will surely support these measures. I'm certain that our climate action plan also implies certain measures in these directions. But this academic work might give a leverage to this discussion, and that's what we have to do with this academic work. We have to put it on the agenda with policy makers and then with decision makers. That's, I think, an important next step.
And
if I may come in,
yes,
I would agree with that, and this is also one of the reasons why I wanted to try and show all the different angles that are pushing in the same direction, all the different pieces of legislation, because it's clear where the journey is going. You know, the European Green Deal is being translated into concrete legislation. But of course, in the end, you also need political support. It's not going to, I mean, that's how it is in a democracy. You know, it's not going to work without it.
Okay. And Jan or Philip or the others, I don't know. The idea which was also proposed in the report is to come up with an ambassador or something like that. One in the team who's trying to get all the people on board. Would that be a kind of solution to move forward, Christoph? Christoph van Oerbeek, do you want to reply in that? Would an ambassador
Comme cela a déjà été précisé notamment par Philippe, nous sommes les
As it was said by Philip, we are the advisors to political decision makers, and we are aware that our support work is important. That's why the regional authorities in Belgium and the federal government put in place a working body that is a group that gathers the four of us to decide to talk about the different policies and propose them to our decision makers. That role, we say that there's no ambassador internally in Belgium, but there are forums for discussion.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Koen, do you want to say something about that? How to move forward?
Yes, well, aviation and my responsibility. I'm part of the Ministry of Transport, and we combine railway, aviation, maritime, and road transport. And we are at this moment performing studies on this as well. So my first suggestion is to join forces and to look at each other's work and see where we can support each other. So that's an invitation towards you to contact us and see where we can be of help. And second thing might be, as far as mass goes, there are some beautiful examples of mass systems created, for example, by Microsoft in the States, which might be examples which we can show to our political level to inspire them and to show them what mass could be. Your microphone, Luke.
Sorry. Philip, do you want to conclude something a little bit about this? How to move forward? Sorry. Wasn't that clear? Flip, can you hear me?
You asked to me. I'm sorry, I didn't hear my name. It's probably a short diversion of my part. Conclusion, well, I think that the results of this ESPON work as to zero emission zones and mass should be put on our calendar, the calendar of policymaking administrations, but also the calendar of political parties, because these are clearly measures that really have an effect and that don't have to cost too much. I might be optimistic here, I know, but still, I think that when we really want to do something about the climate, about sustainability, then those are two measures that are no-brainers as I'm concerned. But again, I'm talking as an expert here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, perhaps it is already 5:15, and we should conclude here somewhere. So might I conclude that your response is more or less focus more on the low-hanging fruit? That's what it is. Mostly the research we have done, zero emission zone seems to be very promising in combination with a kind of mass thing, a mass ecology. Don't forget, of course, what you can do on the high-speed train shifts and the doubling and the tripling of the frequencies over there. And I look at the what is being said by the public over here, and Laurent is also focusing and saying we need new and innovative battery technologies. The current technologies will not suffice, so we could that also take, of course, in account, and that will mean that also the public-private sphere is coming in over here. And Victor is concluding, good to start with low-hanging fruits. Still important to consider not only the policy coherence, but also the policy acceptance. And perhaps there also ESPON could do their thing, of course, to get research done which could help you any further in proceeding with this initiative. Nevertheless, final words. We will repeat these kind of sessions also in the Netherlands and in Germany and in France in order to see how much policy support there would be able to get over there. What would be your takeaway message for those other events we will do in the other parts of the Eurodelta? Christophe, can I start with you?
Mais je pense que le message principal que...
Well, I believe that the main message that I'd like to convey is, well, the presentations were very dense, the results are quite interesting, but as we specified several times, we are just a first step and we can only advise. We have got to see what we can do to escalate it to the political level. That could be my message.
Thanks for that, Christophe. Takeaway message from Jan. Are you willing to also attend on those other meetings in the Netherlands and in Germany?
Yes, it'll be interesting. Like I said, for the corridor, those are very important and relevant questions, and this is exactly the region that's which is interesting for the corridor.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Koen, do you have a takeaway message?
Well, this is a good step. We should base policies upon good, solid scientific work. So I would say we need to continue this.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And Philip?
I thought I already made a closing statement, but I'm willing to repeat it. I think there's a solid academic work here, which we should promote also in other regions, because when only applying this in the region as Flanders or even Belgium, well, that could be a difficult one in a European context, because we have to strive for that European context to take similar measures in similar circumstances. But then again, there's still the local authorities that have to join us. But I am quite optimistic, because we all know that the climate change is there, that we have to do something, and transport has a responsibility to take there. So
yeah. And this morning I have convinced my university general board to do more than they did already with regard to climate change, with regard to our students and our workers. So we all have to work together.